Welcome everybody to Startup Grind. My name is Lucas Latour. I'm the host. If you're not familiar with Startup Grind, it's a global organization dedicated to connecting, educating, and inspiring entrepreneurs. Every month, we do a fireside chat with an outstanding entrepreneur in the community or, in the startup world. And tonight, we're featuring Harley Blakeman, who's the founder and CEO of Honest Jobs. And Harley and I go way back. Before we dive in, I just want to say also thanks to Alex Brown and Dickinson Wright for sponsoring the event tonight. If you need any legal help, they are the folks to talk to. And also thanks to AWH for helping make the event happen. If you ever need any software stuff or want to talk shop on customer advisory boards or really anything related to software, you can hit us up, and that's where I work. So you can talk to me about that after the event. But Harley, welcome. Thanks for coming.
Hey everybody. Thanks for having me, Lucas. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah. So like I was saying, we go way back, and it's interesting because I think I can't remember where we met exactly or when we met. All I know is I used to call you in the morning and wake you up at like 5 a.m. every day for like a year.
Yeah. So I think we met at Idea Foundry right before you started working with GripMat for that stint. But yeah, Lucas woke me up every morning for what, 6 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that. Every morning, 5 a.m., 6 a.m.
Yeah. I used to do like these group. It wasn't just me and Harley, by the way. It was like a group thing. Like we would like everybody would wake up early in the morning. But yeah, that's not the topic for tonight. Tonight we want to talk about Honest Jobs and sort of the journey. But I guess so that was like 3 years ago. Like how long have you been working on Honest Jobs, man?
Yeah, there's a period where it depends on how to answer the question, right? Like entrepreneurial journey or the journey of Honest Jobs specifically. Like I've been working towards solving this problem for about 3 years, maybe 3 years and 2 or 3 months. But really, Honest Jobs started about 2 years ago, maybe 2.5. So there was about a year there where I was trying to figure out what I was doing. And then once I figured out what I was doing, I've been doing that for about 2.5 years.
And just for the folks that aren't super familiar with Honest Jobs, maybe just give a little like overview of like what is Honest Jobs and what's sort of like the mission.
Yeah, so Honest Jobs is the nation's leading fair chance employment platform. And then what we do is we help people with criminal records find employment fast. That's kind of the two one-liners that we use a lot that hopefully get to the root of what we're doing. But we are a software platform similar to a LinkedIn or an Indeed. And kind of our proprietary technology is an algorithm that it can read a job description and tell someone with a criminal record how likely they are to get that job. And then we use that at scale to read millions of job descriptions and promote jobs to people with criminal records, all with the goal of helping them just get started in a job as quickly as possible. And kind of our big target is about 20 to 22 million Americans that have a felony criminal record. They make up about 9.5% of the US workforce. And our goal is to reduce the time it takes for them to find a job by 50%.
Yeah, and it's awesome that you're doing that. Obviously, getting a job is hard enough, and I could imagine, fortunately, I don't have to live this experience myself, but I could imagine that having a felony on your record is extremely difficult for people. So I guess, knowing some of your background, I guess it would maybe be helpful to just like share a little bit about like, how did you kind of figure out sort of the need for this product?
Yeah. So like a lot of great founder stories, it starts with a personal story. Mine's not like fun. It's more of a tragic story, but it's not an uncommon story in America. I grew up lower middle class, I'd say. A parent got addicted to drugs at a young age. My other parent passed away while I was also at a young age. And I just kind of slipped through the cracks and made some really poor decisions, was hanging out with the wrong crowd when I was 16, 17. I dropped out of high school and I ended up getting convicted of a felony right after my 18th birthday. And I ended up being sentenced to 14 months in prison just outside of Atlanta, Georgia, back in 2011. And I came home in 2012. And, I won't tell the whole story, but basically, I did everything someone could possibly do to prove that they are not the person, not a criminal, right? I worked 40, 50, 60 hours a week until I had enough money. Then I put myself through community college. Then I went to Ohio State University. I worked 30 hours a week while taking on student loan debt to go through school, and graduated with honors from the business school. Uh, but basically, my senior year, I interviewed with like 70, 75 companies. They were all very entry level management positions. And I was top of my class with letters of recommendation, Six Sigma certified. Everyone I applied for interviewed me. No one made me an offer. I graduated unemployed, top of my class. And I just knew that something was wrong there because I had been speaking at prisons. I wrote a book about finding a job with a record. And I knew that most people coming home from jail and prison aren't white males with good educations and support systems like I was. So I knew that there was this gap in the market of companies who are willing to hire people, because I've seen like staffing industry, geez, like half the people they place are people with records. So people will hire them. There's just this weird gap in the market between 20 million people who want a job and people who are paying recruiters large placement fees and staffing companies and all this stuff. So our goal was to just, my goal was to use my personal experience to try and figure out how I can address that gap in the market. And like I said, it took me like a year to even figure out how we were going to do it. But really, my personal experience drove me to just know that this is real. And so many people had validated that it was real, that I
Yeah.
pursued.
I thank you for sharing that. That is even just that in and of itself is inspiring. And I think it's one of the things that like I really admire about you, how you had to work it to get to where you are. And you know, I guess like one of my questions is all founders sort of go through this mental journey of taking on risk and assuming the sort of weight of being a founder. And I could imagine that having that also kind of the background kind of, as something additional to deal with, I would imagine that would make the decision to becoming a founder like that much harder. So like, I guess like, how did you even sort of, I don't know, like feel like being a founder was like a legit route or an available route for somebody with your background?
Yeah. Well, for the longest time, I didn't. In college, I tinkered with ideas, drop shipping, like different little ideas that were very easy to do while I like had a free hour or a couple hours here, a couple hours there, but never pulled the trigger on anything. My goal was in college, excuse me, I realized that like when I really try, I excel. Like in school, I was able to get A's in like calculus. I was able to get an A plus. Like so when I saw that, I was like, well, let me just focus on getting a corporate job. This should be easy. Like I can do this stuff. I see kids that are very smart kids that aren't getting A's and B's on these exams, and I am. So like I should easily be able to get one of these jobs paying 70, 80 grand a year out of college with EY or one of these consulting firms. But whenever I saw that I wasn't getting considered,
Hmm.
part of that was out of necessity. Like I really had a pain point
Hmm.
where I felt the need to. And this is sad because a lot of people are feeling that same pain point, but they didn't just graduate from Ohio State. So they're considering selling drugs again. They're considering, stealing something. And I was lucky enough to have, again, a support system. I knew I had my degree. I had a family that if rent wasn't going to be paid, they would not let me go homeless. This is coming out of college. And I also had an insane work ethic. I was working I eventually did find that corporate manufacturing supervisor job, but they had me working 55-hour weeks. And I was finding time outside of work to tinker on the original Honest Jobs idea. So um, I think I did a really good balancing act that I think is required for entrepreneurs to be mentally stable, at least, is like, if you go all in, you're gonna crash and burn a couple times. It's inherently part of the process. Like very few founders are just like, I'm gonna try this and then it takes off. So I think being able to kind of have an option B, but never have an interest in actually doing it. Like you have it, but you're never going to do it. But if you don't have it, like it's a bad potential outcome, right? So like I never did anything where like I was going to end up in jail or I was going to end up homeless. I always had the patience to make sure I had something to fall back on. But to be fair, like I was taking pretty intense risks before I was an entrepreneur, before I got arrested. Even though I didn't really understand the magnitude of the poor decisions I was making, it's very similar. A lot of people coming out of jail and prison make for great entrepreneurs because they're not risk averse. They're willing to do something somebody else wouldn't do to move things forward. So you got to harness that and put it towards something positive. That's what, getting people jobs is also another way to do that. But if they can't find a job, entrepreneurship is a great route for people with criminal records, in my opinion.
Yeah. So another thing that I think a lot of founders sort of struggle with is just, by the way, some stuff came in the chat. Somebody said, wow, because I imagine they're sufficiently amazed by the story like everybody is. But one of the things that founders struggle with, especially early on, is sort of finding resources for their project and sort of getting those early people to kind of believe and give them resources and just talk a little bit, like, let's take us back to sort of like when it was first starting. Like, how did you kind of approach that?
Fundraising?
Yeah, I mean, well, fundraising, I was thinking of, or like even like team building or
What I can speak on my journey, like one of the most profound, when I started to see myself really level up was when I started getting involved in the community, which means nothing to someone who's not involved in the community. They're like, what does that mean? Until you're a part of it, you don't really know it exists and you don't know how to get into it and you don't know any of those things. But early on, really honestly, right around the time I met you, I got involved in your little startup. You had an idea, you were tinkering with it for a couple weeks there, and it was I was your best user.
You were. Harley was my best user.
Woke me up every morning at 5 or 6, and that's when I was first trying to build my business. So, I got connected with Rev One. I got connected with Sea Change, and I actually went through the learning lab at Rev One and the Sea Change Accelerator. And like, to me, I was just fascinated that there's other people out there who like don't want to like drink a beer and watch the football game. They would rather like build an MVP on some like mock-up stuff and talk to customers. And like, I found that fascinating. And like, that's a huge component of it, is because you're not gonna raise money when you're not connected to the system. You're not gonna find co-founders when you're not connected to the system. I mean, you might find customers, but you'll find customers faster and better once you know the skills of the trade. And just getting connected to the ecosystem was huge. And that ecosystem also just led me to be at the right place at the right time sometimes. And that's how I kind of originally got my first angel investment, was through the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And I think really solidifying like your story of like why this is important and making it part of who you are. Unfortunately, that's a big downfall or hard challenge for entrepreneurs is either that separating you from the mission or the company or the brand is like, if you're really passionate, you can almost completely mold your life together with the brand or the ups, and that can be hard because there's really tough, hard times where you feel like your life is failing when really your company's just failing. So I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah. So it sounds like being involved in sort of the startup community and be getting around people that are like-minded kind of helps, facilitate the connections and sort of the things that like end up leading to things like an angel investment. And I think that's super important, especially because what's that?
No, I was just saying, like, co-founders to customers, like understanding all of it. Like, it's just super important to the process is getting involved, because like I am the epitome of someone who knew nothing but they had like a problem, like, the story of Spanx. Like, she was not a businesswoman. She didn't know anything. She just was like, I want to do this, and figured it out. And I think that's what the startup community can do, is it can accelerate all that a whole lot. Because I never worked in sales, never worked in software, never worked in customer service, never like, just the only jobs I had, well, selling drugs before I got arrested. I guess I had done some sales, but it's very different than starting a company, as you can imagine.
Well, you were clearly scrappy at a young age, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, and that's a big part of it, is being scrappy, for sure.
You had a point, and I just lost what I was going to ask you. Oh, so okay, when you talk about, not knowing sales, not knowing tech, not knowing all of these things, the marketing or whatever, I think there's a tendency with founders to, at least in my own experience, I've done this before, where I tend to want to solve or do everything, right? Where it's like, oh, I'll just jump in, I'll just code this thing, or oh, I'll jump in and I'll create the marketing campaign. How do you think about, especially now with like your team, you're having a team built around you, how do you think about, like, what do you take on versus what do you delegate?
Yeah, so it's definitely fluid. As your company evolves, you have to constantly reassess this. And to this point, we've basically told people, here's some bullet points about what you're going to do with the company, not a job description, because we're just like, we don't know what your job's going to be. I mean, now we're starting to get to the point where we're like, oh, you're going to do sales, but we're not going to give you a job description because we don't really know what sales looks like. We're just kind of getting sales, but we haven't created a formula for it. And hiring people who are comfortable with that is really important. Just the nature of figuring it out as you go. I mean, until you're like, what's Series C, you're really still kind of figuring it out. Series B, you're still trying to figure it out. The other thing is like, this morning we had a sprint planning call with the software team, and I listened into all of them. I used to lead them all. I know nothing about code, but I would get on and show screenshots of what I want built, and they would say, that's not how that works. And I'd be like, well, explain it to me. And they would say a bunch of stuff that I didn't even understand, but I'd make them explain it to me anyways. And then I'd say, okay, well, let's do something different. And just being as involved as you can with everything for as long as you can. That can kill you, though, if you don't know when to let go. And really just recently, I mean, the last couple months is when I've learned to let go of certain things. Mark Doyle, CTO, he's in Columbus, obviously. He's earned the ropes to be able to lead our sprint planning calls, prioritizing our backlog. When something goes down at 10 a.m., I can, at 10 p.m., 11 p.m. on a Saturday, I call him, he answers. Like, people have to earn that responsibility in a startup, because as a founder, you can't afford to give someone the ropes for 2-3 months. They'll crash and burn the whole company potentially. That's why founders are 24/7. You got to work all the time. If you got some time, you got to, and the same has come with operations. I don't know what it's like to start a company and immediately delegate. This is pretty much my baby, and people who stick with me long enough, I'll get to learn what they're good at and what they're not, and I'll delegate. But I've finally gotten to a point where I don't do any marketing. I don't do any software development or product backlogging. All I do is focus on recruiting, making sure payroll's done, being on calls to supervise, and occasionally I'll chime in with some thoughts or concerns. But basically leading that team is what I've been doing. But to your question, it's just like, how do you do that? I think was more of your question, is very carefully. You do it cautiously and communicate a lot. And I think if your gut tells you this person's not right, or they're being snippy with me in front of the other employees, or they're arguing a lot, that's a really good sign that you need to not do it, or just be more reserved. Because just like, if you're building a company and you bring on your two best friends to be co-founders, there's a really good chance, it's like a marriage. There's a really good chance you're not all three going to be together in 20 years, right? You're going to you're going to learn things about each other that you didn't know. And the same can go for those early employees, that are going to lead teams. So it's just trust your gut, ask a lot of questions. You know, as a founder, Lucas, you've probably experienced this too. You can interview somebody and be like, all right, start tomorrow, man. But it's so much better to just be patient. Second round interview, third round interview, do like experimental things that might make them uncomfortable to really get to see how they are. Because entrepreneurs get this thing that my investor says happy years, but hear what we want to hear because we're so optimistic. Like we think we can bring this thing into the world. We're super optimistic. So like questioning assumptions is super important.
Yeah, totally. And, I think it's super easy, especially early on when I imagine, maybe not as many people believe in the story. And so those early people that support you, you think this person is the perfect fit, right? And like it gets on the team or whatever. But like as a company scales, like needs change, and it's super hard to navigate that as a founder. Like how do you preserve those relationships but also make it so that like the company is structured in the right way is, I imagine, extremely difficult.
Yeah, and also like you need a rock star sales team, but if you hire the wrong person, it's almost worse than not having it ever. So like the constant, and then do I give them a lot of equity or do I pay them more? And so there's just so many things, and you gotta be okay, like knowing that you're gonna mess up too. Like I've messed up like 10 times, but the team believes in our mission and believes in me as a leader. So it's been great to learn from the mistakes. I had to fire our first employee ever, and that was really hard for me, and it sucked because they didn't see it coming. And it was big lessons learned for me, like a lot of reflecting since I did that on how I'm gonna communicate better as a leader. And I really don't think there's a way around it. You just gotta have fun and enjoy it as much
Yeah.
as you.
Yeah. What do you do to manage stress? Do you have people you go to for advice, or like how do you, because I feel like that's probably a big piece of really every founder's journey. Do you have any strategies? And if maybe you're still figuring it out, I don't know. It's like
I definitely am still figuring
hey,
it
one.
out. I definitely am still figuring it out. I think having other people to talk to about it who understand it is super important, and that's part of why I was saying that entrepreneurial community is great. So you can feel sane, like you're not the only crazy person that's doesn't have a job and is pursuing their dream or whatever. That's important. And then I'm terrible about it, but like prioritizing yourself. And I've learned this when I was in Techstars. I had an executive coach that helped me understand this. Is like, dude, there's nothing more valuable than taking a little bit of time for you. Like, you don't need to have 10 meetings every day if you don't have time for an hour or two of you. And honestly, it sounds weird, but I never played video games. Lucas, I told you about this before I moved, but I started playing Fortnite. And I hate to admit it, but like an hour of Fortnite once a week, like something about my brain, I have to focus on it to do it. And like the 10,000 voices of all the stuff I need to get done disappear for an hour, and I feel like refreshed. So I don't really drink or party or anything like that, but like playing video games for an hour every once in a while. Now that I moved to Denver a few weeks ago, I've been hiking and walking my dog and stuff like that. But I think having people to talk to, I used to chat with Lucas all the time about entrepreneur stuff, and those are a priority. And for the people who can afford it, an executive coach is valuable. I had one for free for 3-4 months, and it was really valuable just having someone who, especially if they've been through like building a company or having an exit, they can just like really help you. And my investors have done the same. If you grow a business to the point where you have seed investment or institutional capital, I have one investor who is more there for like only business stuff, but one investor is like, dude, if you're having life issues, call me. Because if you're having life issues, you're having business issues. Like, talk to me, think of me as a friend and a mentor. So that's been really valuable to have people who just understand the challenges you're facing, especially when they're not always focused on like revenue or returns. They're just like, how's your mental health? How are things going in your life? it took me a long time to start caring about that stuff.
Yeah.
It's valuable to care about it from day one, like mental health.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because I feel like when you're in, because would it be fair to say that at least early on, it was sort of a bootstrapped kind of situation for like a couple years or?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say a couple years. For 4 or 5 months, we were
Okay.
completely. I burned through my 401k. I cashed out my 401k, burned through all of it. And my second week on a job, after I burned through it all, I was basically giving up. I had to get a job. I got a new job my second week into that job. I quit because I raised $100,000. And then that $100,000 lasted a year and a half. So you can imagine there wasn't a whole lot of growth and like paying for employees and stuff going on. We weren't bootstrapped in the sense that it was someone else's money, but I mean, like we were penny pinching, trying to be as scrappy as we could be for as long as we could be.
Mm.
So, yeah.
So, okay, this is interesting because when you are kind of at that stage, right, you might wonder, what do you prioritize, right? Like, what during, if you could go back in that time and like figure out one thing, what would you try to figure out if you were, or focus on if you were in that, or maybe you did focus on the right thing at that point?
I mean, I can't say I didn't because things are working, we've raised.
That's true.
I
Wait, how
can't say
much have you raised now? I can't, are you allowed to say or no?
a ton. I mean, 1.3 million total.
Hmm.
And I mean, we just raised the 1.2 like 3 months ago. So it was all raised recently for the most part. Um, but to answer your question, I mean, I can tell you we are still today uh, trying to answer the question, how many people have been hired? And
Mm.
that's like a fundamental question that if I could go back in time, I would have prioritized tracking that stuff in the very beginning. But we've had over 10,000 people use our system to apply for jobs. So a bootstrap company trying to track hundreds or thousands of people a week that are using the system, we didn't have the ability in the beginning. And we thought, oh, revenue is all that matters. Our revenue is growing month over month over month. But no one wanted to invest because we couldn't answer the question, well, how many people have been hired? We're like, we know of 12, but we think it's in
Mm.
the hundreds, and that was not a good answer, which makes sense, right? You want to get early proof that this thing works with some testimonials from the people who used it. And we waited longer than we should have to make that happen. We now have dozens of testimonials from job seekers and employers, but we waited way too long to do that.
I think you were telling me about somebody you saw a testimonial of someone. It was like a different state. It was like maybe like Maryland or something. And you had this crazy story where somebody had gotten a job and it was like it changed her entire life. Does that ring a bell?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, there's a couple stories like that, of course. Uh, there's one where a woman here in Columbus got out of prison for manslaughter. She was drinking, got in a wreck, and accidentally someone died, and she was left paralyzed. But when she got out of prison, she was about 8 months out, hadn't found a job yet, obviously disabled with a felony record for manslaughter. And we got her a job at a healthcare company doing customer service. And she had worked there for, last time I heard from her, she had worked there for almost 2 years, was promoted, had gotten married, bought a house with her husband. And the testimonial, it sounds almost scripted because she like had so much praise for us. But we also just recently had a guy apply for a warehouse job, and the company interviewed him and then ended up hiring him for the engineering department because he had an architecture degree, and the guy had a violent felony. So there's like, we find these really cool stories of people who had basically given up on the idea that they could have like a real career, and those are the ones that are super powerful, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually it's making me emotional just hearing it. But I think it's interesting to think about sort of second chance employment and like why it's important and like what do people have wrong about people who have criminal records. Like I just want to kind of hear like what do you think like is like the disconnect in our society around that?
Well, I think, it's a complex topic. There's a lot to it. I mean, I could take this from a racial angle, a political angle. I could take it, but what I'll take it from is just like a human angle. If you talk to someone one on one, give me 5 minutes of talking to somebody and I'll change their mind about if they should or shouldn't hire these people. Most people don't have that experience in their whole life, though. They never talk to someone who breaks down why it's the right thing to do. And then the aha moment comes. The reason is because when you're in prison, correctional officers will tell you, I should be here too. I just didn't get caught. Police officers will tell you, oh, I've had a couple drinks, trust me, and drove home. They may not tell you that, but they'll tell their friends that, like, hey, I've drank and drove, I've shoplifted. Like, most people you talk to have done some type of crime where they could have gone to jail for it and had a record. Some people do it more than others, but the truth is 9.5% of the US workforce has a felony criminal record. If you go around and meet people, 1 out of 10 people aren't unemployable, and they're largely written off due to insurance. Honestly, it's insurance and lawyers who are saying, hey, this is how you need to think about these people because they're not a protected class. So, I think there's many issues. The fact that they're not a protected class is troubling, but I don't necessarily think they should be. I think there's other ways to solve the problem. But at the end of the day, I think it's just the right thing to do, is that everyone deserves a second chance. Oftentimes people deserve second or third chances, but it takes us all to be human. You have to actually care. And oftentimes we're at work, we're under pressure, we have a budget, we have a deadline, I need to hire people. One of them has a record, I'm just going to choose the other person because it's just this one thing. I'm just doing this one thing. But all of HR, if 90% of HR managers think like that, they act like that, then we've got 9.5% of the population stuck in poverty forever. And unfortunately, it's disproportionately people of color. So white men, about 1 in 17 white young men will go on to be in prison, whereas 1 in 6 Latinx men will go on to be in prison, and 1 in 3 Black men will go on to be in prison. This is what historical data says. Of course, I hope that's not the truth, but this is what the outcomes are historically. And it's obviously had devastating effects. And
Gotcha.
sorry, I don't know if I answered the question.
No, it's a complicated question, and I think you did a great job of sort of touching on it and like just talking about the different factors that go into it. But
I want to say one last thing, and I'll be super quick, is because this is actually important for anyone who's listening who does hiring, is that people are scared they're going to get sued if they hire people with felony criminal records or records. There are certifications and trainings out there that are free by the Society for Human Resource Management, completely free. The training is called Getting Talent Back to Work, and it's a free certification to learn how to hire people with records. It's not super complicated, but it basically helps you avoid being sued by for negligent hiring. Very, 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 very few people are sued for negligent hiring. And when they have been sued for negligent hiring, it's been very obvious. Like, you hired someone with a DUI to be a truck driver. All you have to do is apply some common sense. And if it's like, there's no clear conflict between the type of crime they committed and the job they're going to be doing, you can let your intuition drive you and say, this is a good person to hire. If it's unclear, look into it. I mean, that's what people really need to know to address this problem, is that negligent hiring lawsuits are few and far in between, however you say it. And all it takes is a little common sense. And if you feel uncomfortable, still take the training, Getting Talent Back to Work. And that's how we address the problem at scale. And sign up for Honest Jobs and pay.
honestjobs.com or .co?
honestjobs.co.
honestjobs.co. There you go. Sign up, folks. So I want to talk about, because we talked a bit about sort of the social impact and the social need, right? I want to shift a little bit and talk about on sort of the employer side and like how you're like kind of creating like a product that addresses a need for the employer, because the employer is the customer, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So how do you sort of think about the need from like the end of the employer side of it?
Yeah. So, there's the most obvious angle is people are looking to hire employees. That's obvious. Why would they post jobs with us, though, is not so obvious. So some of those things I mentioned around negligent hiring, I hate to be a compliance tool, but we're turning into a little bit of a compliance software. So when an employer posts a job with us, let's say it's a cybersecurity job, uh, our system reads the job description using just some pretty simple natural language processing. And we're starting to get into AI to where we're reading the job description and interpreting what it means. So we're able to make meaning out of it. And we have an algorithm that will tell any job seeker, based on the criminal conviction have been convicted of, if this job is a good match for them. Now, what that actually means is we're identifying words and phrases and job duties that might conflict with different types of crimes. So if you have a fraud charge, like a white collar fraud conviction from 6 years ago, and you're applying for the cybersecurity job, when you do your job search, we will show that job towards the bottom of the search results. And there's also a little indicator that tells the job seeker red to green, like how likely their crime is to conflict with the job duties. And ultimately, this just drives behavior that we want. So we want them to apply for jobs that we believe they can get, and we don't want them to apply for jobs we don't believe they can get. And we're able to do that at scale with like millions of jobs all at once while everyone's searching. They're seeing the jobs that they have the best chance of getting. That's great for a job seeker because it's less rejection and a quicker path to employment, but it's also great for the employer because the employer wants to do what's right, but they're scared of being sued and they just need to find an efficient way to not be sued. Like our system's very efficient, so they can give us 500 job descriptions and we can make sure that the only people who are applying are people who they can actually hire. So if you talk to an employer who's hired from this population, they'll tell you, well, we have to consider them on a case by case basis. Well, our algorithm, our system can do that for them. It's individualized assessment that runs every time they do a job search, catered to their unique criminal history. So all it means is like they can engage with this population without having to have like full-time employees reviewing records against job descriptions and all this different stuff. And we're the first product to do this. So we're still, I consider our paid accounts like early adopters still. We definitely haven't found product market fit perfectly, but we're at like 1 in 10 companies that sign up opt into a premium plan. That's the main differentiator. And then our distribution channels are also a key differentiator for us. Is we have tools for government, and we've gotten a couple government contracts now, and basically we are getting everyone coming home for jail and prison. So we have some county contracts. Now we're getting our first state contracts where everyone coming home in the entire state from jail, prison, probation, parole will be added to our database by somebody else. So they're paying us and they're sending us thousands of users. And then we are able to tell warehouses, manufacturing companies, construction companies, hey, we have a predictable labor supply coming home who actually needs this job. And if you'll work with them, we can also help you make sure you're not getting in any hot water by hiring someone for the wrong job. And what we're betting on is long term, we will be the most commonly used resource by 9.5% of the US workforce. Not only because it addresses their problem, but because we have an alliance with government and community partners.
Yeah, I think that other side of it, like the government side of it, is like a huge differentiator and a piece that, like, when you described it to me, I think you were starting to think about this a couple years ago even, but I was like, that's genius, right? Because then you have the supply end, because it's almost like a two-sided market where like you need people to post jobs and you need job applicants, and therefore you've solved that side of the equation already to a great degree, and it's being paid for, which is incredible.
Yeah, exactly. And we have a free tool we can give to government, but then we have a premium tool we can give to government. The same for employers. We have a free service, but we have a paid service, and we're just betting on a certain percentage will opt into it. And our government work is still fairly early, but we're having Department of Corrections from certain states reach out to us to say, we heard that you're working with this other government agency. So there's kind of a tight knit community and like prison reform and the people work in the space. So the brand, like our brand awareness is pretty good. Like we talk to anyone in prison reform, if they're in California, Washington, whatever, they've typically heard of us. So it took a lot of time to get here, but I think we're finally at a point where we're gaining traction on the government side as well.
Gotcha. So it's 6:42. We have like 18 minutes left. I do want to give people the chance to ask some questions. I also have some additional questions that I can ask, but I don't want to, because if I'm not conscious of it, I'll take up the whole time. So I do want to open it up. I see some familiar faces. Elio, hey, welcome. Good to see you, man. And Warner, obviously, you come to every event, so thanks for coming again. And by the way, you can unmute too and ask your question. You don't have to just throw it in the chat, but you're also more than welcome to, if that makes you more comfortable. But when do you want to unmute? Okay.
If not,
can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so my question is, I think I heard you say earlier you're staying in Denver. You're living in Denver.
Yeah. So we're headquartered in Columbus. We've got 6 employees in Columbus. That's still our headquarters, but our recent round of investment was 100% out of Boulder, Colorado, which is a suburb of Denver, basically. And we also landed 3 really big customers in Denver, and we're working on some really cool stuff with the government. So there was just an enormous opportunity for us here. My girlfriend and I decided to just move here for 1 year. We opened an office. We've already hired a couple employees, and we're taking off here in Denver. And but yes, we are still headquartered in Ohio, and we plan to expand our team in Ohio this year as well. So
I just want to say I love what you're doing. I just love it. It's nice. Best wishes to you and your team.
I appreciate that. Thank you for joining and listening in, and for the question as well.
Yeah,
it's a good question. I don't know if we addressed it at the beginning or not, but yeah, good stuff. Any other questions?
Hey, Harley, I'd be curious to get your perspective on the job market in general. I know there's a lot of talk around labor shortages and wage inflation, and kind of how that could hold back the overall economic recovery. So from your lens, what are you seeing in the labor force and from an unemployment perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've had multiple people reach out to me that are like writing articles on this exact topic who are interested to hear how it's impacting our population. What's interesting is I think it actually helped formerly incarcerated people. Partly because many of them aren't eligible for unemployment because they didn't have a job yet. They came home and they, stuck with nothing. The other part is the people who were willing to work were oftentimes able to fill jobs that they wouldn't have been considered for prior. So a good example of this is the hospitality food service industry. They are reopening and they're struggling to find people, which there's many reasons why. Wages were probably lower than they needed to be, and I think this is a correction, probably a small correction. But also just like those people who wanted to work but didn't have a job, they went to warehousing and manufacturing and company and industries that were still surviving, right? So somebody who is making $9.50 before working at a restaurant might be making $13 now at a warehouse or a manufacturing plant. So I think there's a lot of misalignment between who used to have those jobs, and so that you think of an industry and the people that filled it. Now they're not lined up the way they were before. And then also, obviously, many people, especially people who had children, had a really hard time making that decision to go back to work, and many of them still haven't. My brother, has 3 kids. He was getting $600 for each kid on top of unemployment, and he was not going to make more. He was going to make less if he went back to work. This is where, the government comes up with like a cookie cutter solution, and it's always inefficient when there's so many people that they're trying to apply it to. And it's not bashing the government in any way. It's just a product of trying to prescribe one thing to everyone. But what we have seen is between, pre-COVID, there was a super tight labor market. I don't know if people know, but before COVID, it was tight. It was hard to find anybody. Then COVID happened, everybody got laid off, and which hurt us. We lost 90% of our business basically in 2 weeks. And then the protests added an interesting dynamic to our business. Not every business, but obviously diversity, equity, inclusion consulting people, this was their year, right? They all got a lot more contracts than usual for good reason, but so did we. We had companies reaching out to us, and we were able to talk to companies about how, if you're going to effectively implement DE&I strategies to attract people of color, you got to realize more of them are going to fail the background check. And how are you going to handle that? Like, do you have a plan, or are you just going to do the same old thing you've always done? So that gave us an opportunity that was not directly a consequence of the pandemic, but it was an element that overlapped dramatically with the consequences of the pandemic. And I don't think that's going anywhere. I hope it doesn't go anywhere. I hope companies continue to focus on those efforts. And that's been beneficial for us because there's some overlap between all of those things and honest jobs. So it's helped us get the awareness of executive teams. When you're trying to sell a job placement service, it's very hard to get attention. But when you have these elements that we're able to talk to, we're different enough to at least get a first meeting. And that's been really beneficial.
Good stuff. Other questions?
One of the senior.
Oh yeah, I saw this comment come in. I guess a senior dev over at Path.
Yeah,
super proud of working on the product. So that's awesome.
Yeah, we hired him to work for us for 6 or 7 months, I think, as a contractor. He's a college buddy. He used to sit. I had classes with him in college.
I'm curious, Harley, about sort of how you're thinking about the team now. Like, what's the team looking like these days?
So we just hired our 7th, 8th, and 9th, or 8th, 9th, and 10th employees. So we have 10 people, 4 full-time software developers. And myself, an operations manager, a marketing intern, an employment specialist, a recruiter, and then we just hired our first salesperson. And sales is tricky. This time I made sure I have like the runway and the patience to really wait that out, because as an entrepreneur, you're typically your best salesperson for a really long time. And the first time I brought on a salesperson, I didn't really understand what it's like to bring on a salesperson, your first salesperson. So I think I'm in a much better position now to do that. But yeah, we struggled to find our most recent software developer, as everyone who's looking for software developers is struggling. So shout out AWH. They can help if you can't find software developers. We eventually found somebody, a great guy. And one of our advantages is we hire people with records. 7 of our 10 employees have felonies, and they're all great. No one's punched anybody. No one's stolen anything. And we are growing very fast as far as revenue and users goes.
See, I love that, because you practice what you preach, right? It would be different if like nobody on the inside had a record. I think that would be weird, right?
Yeah, I think it's going to lend itself to success. I mean, just like any company, we have to prioritize getting the right people to move things forward, but it will be a big part of our success if we go on to be successful, is the fact that like it sounds cheesy, but it's a movement. I mean, 10% of the country has this problem, and it's a massive problem that needs to be addressed. It's bad for everyone if it's not addressed. And I think when people go through that, there's so many talented Americans who go through this challenge. When they're given an opportunity, they'll excel, but when they're given an opportunity to solve the problem that millions of other people are facing, that they also felt the pain of, I think it really makes for a powerful alignment amongst the entire team. Like, this isn't just a job for any of our employees. I truly believe all of our employees, this is like a part of their life, and what they want to accomplish in their lifetime is like to see this come to fruition. So long answers all day.
No, it's good. It's actually great when we get long answers, because that means I have to do less work. By the way, I also saw Elio dropped a link in to 614 Startups. I guess you did a podcast over there. Elio, are you still on?
A while back, yeah.
Oh, he's walking.
Yeah, man, I'm still on. It's daddy duty out here. Kids in the yard. I'm moving around hoses and sprinklers, man. So that's why my camera's off.
Oh, no worries, man. Do you want to plug 614 Startups real quick?
Oh yeah, I'll get you something to drink. Yeah, 614 Startups. Columbus's #1 source of startup news and interviews with founders and investors that are shaping the city. 614startups.com, man.
Yeah.
And I also am the founder of Entrepreneurs Brew, which everybody who's on this call is eligible to get a free pound of coffee for being here. So that's my plug. And then Harley's my guy, man. If you, I know I wasn't here early in the podcast, so I probably missed his backstory. But if you want to kind of get into the details of who he is and why he does what he does, that's why I put the link in the chat. So
yeah, for sure. And Ilya, we love the podcast, do a great job. So yeah, I definitely recommend checking that out. And by the way, I've been meaning to thank you for like 3 or 4 events about the Entrepreneurs Brew that our attendees are eligible for. So thank you. And I I apologize. I get so wrapped up sometimes that I forget. But yeah.
And big shout out to Harley, man. Talk about taking a break from all the craziness. I'm out here, even though Columbus is a growing city, I'm out here in the country. It's an important part about of stepping away from all the craziness of being a founder too, just getting out in nature and having a good time.
For sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, you guys are welcome, man. Entrepreneurs Brew, we're a growing coffee company. Don't want to steal the thunder, but claim your coffee, all right?
Yeah, for sure. And we need you here to plug that more often, because yeah, people don't know. People get their free coffee if they come to Startup Grind. So
that's right. Best intentions always. You RSVP and come the day of, something comes up. So today I kind of, regardless of what's going on and kids running around, I wanted to be on here. So thank you guys for having me.
Well, thanks, man. Well, cool. Any final thoughts or final questions for Harley while we've got him on the hook?
While anybody's thinking, I will say I'm expecting in the next 3 to 6 months, probably closer to 3, to raise more money. And I would love to get some money from the Ohio investment ecosystem. I have had my head down working. And when I got into Techstars, I got really well connected to the investor ecosystem in Denver, but I'm proud to be a Buckeye. And I think that whoever invests in us will get a great return and change a lot of lives. So if anybody's watching,
there you go.
Wants to connect me with somebody they know really well, feel free to do so. I'd love to talk to people about our future.
So by the way, this is how you know Harley is a true entrepreneur, because he took the opportunity to pitch at the end. Like I always tell entrepreneurs, like you've got to be ready with an ask, especially if you have a platform or an audience. So yeah, any investors, obviously hit up Harley. I'll think about that too. Maybe I can, I'm sure you and I probably know all the same people, but if I think of anybody, I'll send them your way.
Perfect. Thanks, man.
Yeah, for sure. Well, cool. If that's it, this was a great event. Harley, thanks so much, man, for coming and sharing your story and giving us some open, authentic kind of answers on like the journey of being a founder, because, it is a hard journey and a lot of people go through similar things. So we really appreciate the candor and all of the insights.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Lucas. And still a Buckeye, living in Denver right now, but I'll be back. I'll be back once a week every month. So let me know if anybody wants to meet up for coffee sometime. All right. Well, we'll connect after, and next time you're in town, we'll have to get coffee. Perfect. We'll get some entrepreneur brew. Yeah, there you go. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.